My ex-wife sued to evict me from my house so her new boyfriend could own his first home. In court, my 7-year-old asked the judge, "Can I show you something Mummy doesn't know?" The judge nodded. She held up her tablet, pressed play. When it started, "My name's Liam Parker. I'm 36 years old, and I'm pretty sure I'm living in some kind of alternate reality where common sense went on permanent vacation and forgot to leave a forwarding address. By day, I'm an architect, the guy who designs buildings that actually stay standing, unlike my marriage. By night, I'm a single dad trying to convince my 7-year-old that vegetables aren't a government conspiracy. And apparently, in my spare time, I've become a professional doormat with a minor in getting screwed over by people I once trusted with my Netflix password. Let me paint you a picture of my glamorous life. 2 years ago, my ex-wife Tessa and I called it quits. The divorce was about as amicable as a cage match between two rabid raccoons fighting over the last slice of pizza. She walked away with the BMW, a sleek, black, "I'm successful and you're not" kind of vehicle that I'd been making payments on for 3 years. I got the mortgage. That little $350,000 anchor tied around my neck that I'll be paying off until I'm approximately 93 years old. Fair trade, right? I'm practically winning at life over here. Here's the thing nobody tells you about divorce. It's not just about splitting assets. It's about watching someone walk away with half of everything you built while you're left holding the emotional equivalent of a participation trophy and a stack of bills that could wallpaper a small country. But hey, at least I got the house. The house I bought after working 2 jobs for 4 years straight, surviving on a steady diet of instant ramen and the crushing weight of existential dread. Also, Tessa could find herself. Spoiler alert, she found herself a man named Blake. Blake. Even his name sounds like it should come with a warning label. He's a gym influencer. And yes, that's apparently a real job now. Whose only architectural experience involves building his biceps and constructing protein shakes that probably violate several laws of physics. The man has 17,000 Instagram followers who watch him do squats in slow motion while he talks about manifesting abundance and crushing your goals. His bio literally says, "Fitness King Crown Dream Chaser, living my best life." I threw up in my mouth a little when I first saw it. So imagine my complete and utter lack of surprise when, 3 months ago, I got a package in the mail that wasn't my usual Amazon delivery of stress relief tea and regret. No, this was a special delivery from the universe's customer service department, and the universe was apparently run by sadists. Legal papers. The kind that come in an official-looking envelope that makes your stomach drop faster than an elevator with cut cables. I stood in my kitchen in my house, that I paid for, holding these papers like they might explode if I moved too fast. The header read Superior Court of California, in that fancy font that official documents use to make you feel simultaneously important and terrified. Plaintiff, Tessa Williams. She'd already changed back to her maiden name, which honestly, good for her. Defendant, Liam Parker. That's me. The idiot who thought buying a house would be a smart investment in his future. I skimmed through the legal jargon, which is basically English written by aliens who only have a theoretical understanding of human communication, until I got to the good part. Transfer of property rights for new homeowner opportunity. I had to read it 3 times. Then 4. Then I walked away, made coffee, came back, and read it again just to make sure I wasn't having a stroke. Nope. Still said the same thing. Translation for those of us who speak regular human. Tessa wanted me out of my own house so that Blake, her protein shake prince, her bicep-blessed boyfriend, her gym rat Romeo, could own his first home. My house. The one I designed. The one where I personally selected every fixture, every paint color, every door handle. The house where I'd spent countless nights in my home office, hunched over blueprints and AutoCAD files, designing buildings for other people while my own life fell apart in the next room. The house where I'd built a treehouse frame in the backyard for Ellie that was still waiting for me to finish it. The house that represented every sacrifice I'd made, every extra shift I'd worked, every dream I'd had about stability and family and putting down roots. And Tessa wanted to just hand it over to a guy whose greatest achievement was hitting 20K followers on TikTok by posting videos of himself doing burpees shirtless. I was still standing there, staring at these papers like they might spontaneously combust from the sheer audacity of their contents. when I heard little footsteps padding down the hallway. Ellie appeared in her pajamas, the ones with unicorns on them that she insisted on wearing every single night, even though they were getting too small and I needed to buy her new ones. She had her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm and sleep still crusted in the corners of her eyes. "Daddy." Her voice was small, uncertain. Kids have this weird sixth sense for when adults are stressed, like tiny emotional radar detectors. I quickly tried to school my face into something that didn't scream, "Your mother is trying to steal our house." But I'm pretty sure I failed miserably. I must have muttered something under my breath. Probably eviction notice, or "Are you freaking kidding me?" or some combination of profanity that I immediately regretted saying within earshot of a 7-year-old. Ellie blinked up at me with those huge brown eyes that she definitely got from her mother, even though I hate admitting that Tessa gave me anything good. "Daddy, are we moving again?" And there it was. The knife, right in the gut, twisted for good measure. We'd already moved once when Tessa and I split. Ellie had to change schools, leave her friends, adjust to shuttling between two houses every other week like a tiny human ping-pong ball. She'd handled it better than I had, honestly, but I could see the worry in her face now. The fear that everything stable was about to get yanked away again. I bent down to her level, which at my height requires actual structural engineering of my knees, and forced myself to smile. It probably looked deranged. I felt like a hostage in one of those proof-of-life videos, holding up today's newspaper while someone off-camera holds a gun to my head. "No, sweetheart. We're not moving. Your mummy's just confused." Confused. That was the nicest word I could come up with that didn't require me to establish a swear jar fund that would pay for Ellie's college education. Confused about basic property rights. Confused about the concept of "this isn't yours." Confused about the fundamental principle of not trying to steal your ex-husband's house for your boyfriend who thinks meal prep is a personality trait. Ellie seemed satisfied with this answer, or at least willing to pretend she was for my sake. She nodded, hugged my leg, and shuffled back to her room to presumably continue whatever dream she'd been having about unicorns or ice cream or things that made sense in this crazy world. I stood up, my knees cracking like bubble wrap, and looked back down at the legal papers. Somewhere in Los Angeles, probably in some overpriced apartment with exposed brick and string lights that Blake definitely called aesthetic, Tessa and her lawyer had sat down and decided this was a good idea. That suing me for the house I built, literally and figuratively, was the right move. I walked over to my coffee maker, poured myself what was probably my fourth cup of the day, even though it wasn't even noon, and did what any rational adult would do in this situation. I laughed. Not a happy laugh. More like the kind of laugh you hear from villains in movies right before they snap and start monologuing about their evil plans. A laugh that said, "Oh, you want to play this game? Okay, let's play." Because here's what Tessa didn't know. I'm an architect. I design load-bearing structures. I understand foundations, support beams, and what happens when you try to remove something essential from a stable system. I know how to build things that last. And I also know how to fight for what's mine. This house. It wasn't just property. It was proof that I'd survived. That I'd built something solid even when everything else fell apart. So bring it on, Tessa. Bring your lawyer. Bring your gym rat boyfriend. Bring whatever delusional arguments you've cooked up. This house has my name on the deed, my blood in the walls, and my daughter's height marks on the kitchen door frame. You want it? You're going to have to tear it from my cold, legally documented hands. And spoiler alert, I've got receipts. Literal ones. Every single payment, every invoice, every proof of purchase. Paper doesn't lie. People do, usually with matching fonts and fake smiles. I took another sip of coffee, set the legal papers on the counter, and started making a list. First thing, call a lawyer. Second thing, organize every document that proved this house was mine. Third thing, figure out what the hell was wrong with the universe that this was even happening. But that last one might take a while. I had a feeling this was going to be a long fight. Good thing I'd built this house to last. 3 days after receiving the legal papers that made me question whether I'd accidentally slipped into an alternate dimension where logic didn't exist, my phone buzzed with a text message from Tessa. I was in the middle of a client meeting, trying to explain why knocking down a load-bearing wall to create an open concept vibe was a terrible idea that would result in their second floor becoming their new first floor, when I saw her name pop up on my screen. My stomach immediately did that thing where it tries to escape through your throat. Let's talk over coffee. Civilly. I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds while my client droned on about how they saw this really cool design on Pinterest. Civilly. That word right there, that was my first red flag. When your ex-wife uses the word civilly, what she really means is, I'm about to ruin your day, but I'm going to do it in a public place where you can't yell at me without looking like a psychopath. It's the adult equivalent of a kid saying, no offense, right before they tell you that your haircut makes you look like you lost a fight with a lawnmower. In my experience, which admittedly is extensive when it comes to Tessa-related disasters, civilly also tends to mean, I brought a lawyer, or I've rehearsed this conversation 17 times in the mirror, or, in the worst-case scenario, both of the above plus I'm recording this for evidence. Nothing good ever comes from a conversation that needs to be prefaced with a promise of civility. That's like a surgeon saying, don't worry, I'll try not to kill you. The fact that they have to say it at all is deeply concerning. But what was I going to do? Ignore her? Pretend I didn't see the message? I was already being sued by this woman. Avoiding a coffee date wasn't going to make my legal problems disappear, although it would definitely improve my blood pressure. So I did what any reasonable person being sued by their ex-wife would do. I texted back a thumbs-up emoji, which is the universal symbol for, I acknowledge your message, but I'm dead inside. We agreed to meet at this bougie coffee shop downtown called the Daily Grind. Yes, that's actually the name, because apparently every coffee shop in California is legally required to have a pun-based name. It's one of those places where a regular coffee costs approximately the same as a car payment and comes with foam art that's too pretty to drink. The kind of establishment where everyone's typing away on MacBooks, pretending to write the next great American novel when they're really just updating their LinkedIn profiles and stalking their exes on Facebook. I arrived exactly on time because I'm neurotic like that, and also because I wanted to get there before Tessa so I could choose my seat strategically. In any negotiation, and make no mistake, this was definitely a negotiation even if she was calling it a chat. Positioning matters. I grabbed a table near the back with a view of the entrance so I could see her coming. Also, it was close to the bathroom, which is always a tactical advantage when you might need to escape or vomit from stress. I ordered an Americano because ordering something simple when everyone else is getting half CF soy milk triple shot caramel macchiato with a whisper of vanilla is a power move, and I needed all the power moves I could get. Then I sat there, watching the door like a paranoid meerkat, mentally preparing myself for whatever fresh hell Tessa was about to unleash. She walked in 15 minutes late. Of course she did, because making me wait was probably part of her strategy, wearing her professional woman who has her life together uniform. A crisp navy blazer, pressed white blouse, designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and those heels that make that confident clicking sound on hard floors. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she had on that shade of lipstick she always wore when she meant business. But it was her smile that really got me. That smile. I knew that smile intimately. It was her, I won the divorce and am about to win this too smile. The smile that said she'd already practiced this conversation in her head and decided she was going to walk away victorious. Liam, she said, sliding into the chair across from me like we were old friends catching up, not two people currently engaged in legal warfare. Thanks for meeting me. Didn't realize I had a choice, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee that was still too hot and burned my tongue. Perfect. Now I'd spend the rest of this conversation tasting scorched taste buds. Your lawyer made it pretty clear that communication was encouraged. She did this little laugh, the one that wasn't really a laugh, but more of a polite acknowledgement that I'd made a sound with my mouth. Let's not start off negative, okay? I really think we can work this out like adults. Like adults. Right. Because adults definitely sue each other for houses and then invite each other to overpriced coffee shops to work it out. That's totally normal adult behavior. I was about to respond with something sarcastic when the door opened again and in walked Blake. Oh, Blake. Blake with his backward snapback cap and his tank top that showed off arms that had clearly never missed a gym day in their entire existence. Blake with his megawatt smile and his cologne, or was it just the natural scent of protein powder and arrogance that preceded him by approximately 15 feet? Blake who waved at Tessa like he'd just spotted her across a crowded beach in a romantic movie. not a coffee shop where his girlfriend was meeting her ex-husband to discuss stealing his house. "Babe," he called out, loud enough that half the coffee shop turned to look. He bounded over. And I mean literally bounded, like a golden retriever who'd just been let off his leash, and kissed Tessa on the cheek before dropping into the chair next to her. "Sorry I'm late. Leg day ran long." Of course it did. Because when you're trying to steal someone's house, the most important thing is making sure your quads are properly fatigued first. "Blake," Tessa said, and I could hear the slight edge in her voice that told me this wasn't planned. Or maybe it was planned, and she was just a really good actress. With Tessa, you never could tell. "I thought you were going to wait in the car." "Nah, babe. I wanted to be here to support you. Plus, this involves me too, right?" He turned to me with this smile that I'm pretty sure he thought was disarming, but actually made him look like a used car salesman. "Hey, Liam. No hard feelings, man. We're all adults here." There was that phrase again. Adults. Everyone kept saying it like it was some kind of magic spell that would make this situation less insane. "Right," I said slowly. "Adults. Having coffee. About a lawsuit. Totally normal Thursday afternoon activity." Tessa shot me a look that could have frozen lava, then reached into her designer purse, which I also probably paid for during our marriage, and pulled out a manila folder. She slid it across the table toward me with the kind of practiced gesture that told me she'd been rehearsing this moment. The folder landed between us with a soft thud that somehow sounded ominous. "Liam, it's not personal," she said, using that calm, reasonable voice that I'd learned during our marriage meant she'd already made up her mind and wasn't interested in hearing alternatives. "Blake and I are building a life together. We need a stable home for our future. You understand that, right?" I opened the folder because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Inside were documents, lots of documents, with highlighted sections and sticky notes with Tessa's handwriting. They were talking about equitable distribution and fair market value and reasonable accommodation and a bunch of other legal terms that basically boiled down to, "Give us your house." "Your future," I repeated, looking up from the papers. "Your future looks exactly like my current address." "What a coincidence." "Look," Blake interjected, leaning forward and putting his elbows on the table in this casual way that was probably supposed to make him seem approachable, but really just invaded my personal space. "I get it, man. You're attached to the place. But every man needs his first home, you know? It's like a milestone. And Tessa and I, we're ready to take that step." I felt my eye twitch. Literally twitch. Like I was developing a nervous tic in real time. "A milestone," I said. "Buying your first home. That's definitely a milestone. You know what else is a milestone? Actually buying it. With your own money. From someone who's selling it. Not suing your girlfriend's ex-husband for it." Blake blinked at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. Tessa put her hand on his arm, a gesture that was clearly meant to shut him up before he made things worse, and turned her attention back to me. "You're being difficult," she said, and there was that edge in her voice now, the one that used to make me back down during arguments because I didn't want to fight. But I wasn't that guy anymore. That guy died somewhere around the time I signed the divorce papers and realized I'd spent 7 years married to someone who viewed me as an ATM with feelings. Difficult. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. A real smile this time, not the hostage smile I'd given Ellie. "Nah, Tessa, I'm not being difficult. I'm being a load-bearing wall." She frowned. "What? A load-bearing wall?" I repeated, enjoying her confusion more than I probably should have. "You know, the kind you can't just remove without the whole structure collapsing? That's me. I'm the load-bearing wall of this situation. You can't just take me out of my own house because your boyfriend needs a milestone." I stood up, leaving my half-finished Americano on the table. "But hey, I'll tell you what. When you two decide to buy your own place, with your own money, through legal channels, like actual adults, give me a call. I design houses for a living. I'd be happy to recommend a good realtor." I walked out of the daily grind feeling something I hadn't felt in 2 years, like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't going to let them steamroll me. Behind me, I could hear Tessa calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I had receipts to organize and a lawyer to call. This war was just getting started. You know that feeling when you think things can't possibly get worse, and then the universe looks at you and says, "Hold my beer." Yeah, that's basically been my life for the past week. After the coffee shop disaster where I walked out on Tessa and Blake's delusional presentation about why they deserved my house, I figured that was it. I'd made my position clear. I'd stood my ground. I'd used a construction metaphor that I was honestly pretty proud of. Surely, they'd realize this whole thing was ridiculous and back off. Spoiler alert, they did not back off. 5 days after the coffee date from hell, I was working from home, which sounds fancy but really just means I was sitting at my kitchen table in sweatpants, trying to finish a design proposal for a client who wanted their bathroom to have Zen energy, but also enough marble to bankrupt a small nation. Ellie was at school. The house was quiet except for the clicking of my keyboard, and I was actually having a semi-productive day. I'd even managed to drink my coffee while it was still hot, which for a single parent is basically winning the lottery. Then my doorbell rang. Now, I'm not a paranoid person by nature, but ever since receiving those initial legal papers, every unexpected sound made me jump like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. The doorbell was no exception. I looked up from my laptop, glanced at the front door through the hallway like it might explode, and seriously considered just pretending I wasn't home. Maybe if I stayed really quiet, whoever it was would just leave the package on the porch and go away. But then the doorbell rang again. And again. Whoever was out there was persistent, which usually means one of three things: religious missionaries, someone selling something you definitely don't need, or legal trouble. Given my current situation, I was betting on option 3. I shuffled to the door in my sweatpants and a t-shirt that had a coffee stain on it from 3 days ago. Don't judge me. Laundry is hard. And peered through the peephole. Standing on my porch was Gary, my mailman. I'd known Gary for about 4 years now. He was a good guy, early 50s, always had a joke or a comment about the weather, the kind of mailman who remembered that I liked getting packages on the porch rather than having to go to the post office to pick them up. But today, Gary looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. He was holding a large envelope, the official-looking kind, and his expression was somewhere between, "I'm sorry for your loss," and "please don't shoot the messenger." I opened the door. "Hey, Gary." "Liam," he said, and his voice had that tone people use at funerals. "Man, I hate to do this, but I need you to sign for this." He held out the envelope like it was contaminated with something radioactive, along with his little electronic signature pad that always made me feel like I was signing my life away every time I used it. Which, given the current circumstances, might actually be accurate. I took the pad and scribbled something that vaguely resembled my signature. Let me guess. More good news from my ex-wife. Gary winced. "Man, this looks rough. Like, really rough. I've been delivering mail for 23 years, and I can always tell when someone's getting the bad kind of legal mail. This is definitely the bad kind." "Yeah," I said, taking the envelope from him with all the enthusiasm of someone accepting a live grenade. "It's from my ex. She's recycling her wedding lawyer. Apparently, he did such a great job helping her take half my stuff the first time that she hired him back for the sequel." Gary shook his head in that universal gesture of male solidarity that said, "Women, am I right? But also, I'm not touching that topic with a 10-foot pole because I value my marriage." He backed away from my door like the envelope might explode at any second. "Good luck, man. You're gonna need it." "Thanks, Gary. Your sympathy is truly heartwarming." He was already halfway down my walkway, probably eager to get away from whatever legal disaster was unfolding at my address. I couldn't blame him. If I could run away from my own life, I probably would too. I closed the door and stood in my entryway, holding this envelope like it was a bomb that might detonate if I opened it too fast. Through the window next to the door, I could see Gary driving away in his little mail truck, probably thanking whatever deity postal workers pray to that he didn't have to stick around and watch me read whatever fresh hell was inside. I walked back to the kitchen, set the envelope on the table next to my laptop, and stared at it for a solid 5 minutes. Maybe if I looked at it long enough, it would spontaneously combust or transform into something less terrible, like a coupon for a free sandwich or a notification that I'd won the lottery. But no, it just sat there, being all official and ominous. Finally, I ripped it open, because apparently I'm the kind of masochist who can't leave well enough alone, and pulled out the papers inside. They were thicker this time, more official looking, with more stamps and seals and signatures, and all the bureaucratic bells and whistles that said, "This is real now, buddy, and you're officially screwed." At the top, in bold letters that seemed to be mocking me, "Official notice of legal action, property dispute." I started reading, and with every paragraph, I felt my blood pressure rising to levels that probably required medical intervention. The lawsuit was written in that special kind of legal language that's technically English, but might as well be ancient Sumerian for all the sense it made to normal humans. But even through all the whereas and therefores and parties of the first part, I could understand the basic gist of what Tessa and her lawyer were claiming. They were arguing, and I'm not making this up, that because Tessa and I were married when I bought the house, she had a claim to it despite the fact that her name wasn't on the deed. She didn't contribute to the down payment, and she'd already waived her rights to the property in our divorce settlement. Their argument was some convoluted nonsense about equitable distribution and unfair advantage, and how I'd apparently used marital assets to secure the property. Marital assets. The money I'd earned working 2 jobs while she was finding herself by taking yoga classes and expensive weekend trips with her girlfriends was apparently marital assets now. But the real kicker, the part that made me actually laugh out loud in my empty kitchen like a crazy person, was the section where they explained the reasoning behind the lawsuit. I'm going to quote it directly because you can't make this stuff up. The plaintiff seeks only fairness and stability for her family unit as she embarks on this new chapter of her life. The property in question would provide the appropriate foundation for establishing a secure household environment. Her family unit. Her family. They were literally calling Tessa and Blake a family unit in official legal documents, as if slapping an official-sounding label on their relationship somehow justified stealing my house. By family, they obviously meant Blake. The guy whose idea of a secure household environment probably involved a weight bench in the living room and protein shakes in the fridge where normal people keep actual food. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called Tessa. She picked up on the third ring, and I could hear music in the background, probably Blake's workout playlist, which no doubt consisted of songs with titles like Eye of the Tiger and Gonna Fly Now. Liam, she said, and she had the audacity to sound surprised, like she couldn't possibly imagine why I'd be calling her after being officially served with lawsuit papers. I was going to call you. You sued me, I interrupted, because I wasn't in the mood for small talk or pleasantries or whatever script she'd prepared. You officially, legally, with actual lawyers sued me. For the house I bought. The house you already gave up in our divorce. The house that has my name, just my name, on the deed. Liam, I can explain. Oh, I'd love to hear this explanation. Please, explain to me how you think you're entitled to property you legally waived your rights to 2 years ago. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her doing that thing she always did when she was trying to come up with a good lie. That little pause where she'd tilt her head and bite her lower lip. It's nothing personal, she finally said, and I wanted to reach through the phone and shake her. Blake and I just need. Nothing personal? I couldn't help it. I laughed. Actually laughed. Tessa, you're trying to take my house. The house where your daughter lives half the time. The house I built, literally designed and built. How is that not personal? We just want what's fair. Fair? Fair. You know what would be fair? If you and your gym rat boyfriend went out and bought your own house like normal people, instead of trying to steal mine through some legal loophole your lawyer probably found in the back of a cereal box. You're being unreasonable, she said, and I could hear the ice in her voice now, the tone that meant she was done pretending to be nice. My lawyer says we have a strong case. Your lawyer is billing you by the hour and probably laughing all the way to the bank. But you know what? Go ahead. Sue me. Take me to court. I'll be there with every single receipt, every bank statement, every text message, every piece of evidence that proves I paid for every single nail in this house while you were off finding yourself. I hung up before she could respond, which felt good for approximately 30 seconds before the reality of my situation crashed back down on me like a ton of bricks. I was being sued, officially, legally sued, for my own house, by my ex-wife and her boyfriend who thought crushing it was a viable life philosophy. I spent the rest of that afternoon doing what any rational person would do in my situation. I started gathering evidence. Every receipt from the house purchase, every mortgage payment confirmation, every email exchange with the real estate agent, every text message from during our marriage where Tessa complained about me working too much, which was rich, considering that work paid for literally everything. I created a folder on my computer labeled Receipts because I'm petty like that, and I started scanning and organizing everything. Bank statements showing deposits from my paychecks, withdrawal records for the down payment, Loan documents with only my name on them. It was tedious, mind-numbing work, but with every document I scanned, I felt a little bit better, a little bit more confident. Because here's the thing about paper, it doesn't lie. People lie. People lie with matching fonts and practice smiles, and lawyers who bill $400 an hour. But paper? Paper just sits there, telling the truth in black and white, immune to manipulation and bullshit. By the time I had to pick up Ellie from school, I had a digital folder with over 200 documents, all neatly organized and labeled, all screaming the same truth. This house was mine. I'd earned it, bought it, and paid for it. And I'd be damned if I was going to let anyone take it from me. You know what's great about family drama? The way relatives who haven't spoken to you in 6 months suddenly emerge from the woodwork like cockroaches when you turn on the kitchen light at 2 a.m. Seriously, it's like they have some kind of sixth sense for detecting when your life is imploding, and they just can't resist crawling out of their holes to offer their unsolicited opinions about how you should handle things. It's like a twisted version of a bat signal, except instead of calling Batman, it summons every aunt, uncle, cousin, and second-removed family member who thinks they're qualified to give life advice despite the fact that their own lives are held together with duct tape and poor decisions. The first call came from my mother 2 days after I got officially served. Mom, bless her heart, is the kind of person who believes that every problem can be solved with a casserole and a heart-to-heart conversation. She's also the kind of person who still talks to Tessa, because apparently when you divorce someone, your mother doesn't get the memo that she's supposed to pick a side. In Mom's world, everyone can just get along if they try hard enough, which is a lovely philosophy that works great in Disney movies and absolutely nowhere else. Liam, honey, she said when I picked up the phone, and I could already tell by her tone that this was going to be one of those conversations. I heard about the house situation. From Tessa, I'm guessing? I was sitting in my home office, surrounded by piles of documents and legal papers, feeling like I was drowning in bureaucracy. Let me guess what she told you. Poor Tessa just wants a fair chance at stability, and mean old Liam is being difficult about it. She didn't say it like that, Mom replied, but her tone told me that's exactly how Tessa had said it. She just mentioned that you two were having some disagreements about property, and she seemed really stressed about it. She's stressed? She's the one suing me, Mom. I'm the one being sued for my own house by my ex-wife and her boyfriend who thinks protein powder is a food group. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear Mom choosing her words carefully, like she was defusing a bomb. Maybe you should think about compromising. For Ellie's sake. And there it was. The magic phrase. For Ellie's sake. The universal trump card that parents use when they want you to roll over and accept something terrible because it's supposedly better for the children. Never mind that Ellie was perfectly happy living with me in a house that was stable and secure. Never mind that moving her around again would disrupt her entire life. No, apparently I should just hand over my house to my ex and her muscle-bound boyfriend, because that would somehow be better for my daughter. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Tessa called you first, didn't she? Another pause. Longer this time. She might have mentioned it when we talked last week. Last week. So she called you before she even officially served me. She's building her narrative, Mom. She's getting to everyone first and spinning this story about how she's the victim and I'm the bad guy. Do you understand that? She's manipulating you. Liam, that's not fair. She's just trying to steal my house. She's trying to steal my house. There's no other way to spin it. I bought this place. I paid for it. She left. And now she wants it back because her new boyfriend needs a milestone. I made air quotes even though Mom couldn't see them. That's not compromise, Mom. That's theft with legal paperwork. Mom sighed. That deep, disappointed sigh that mothers have perfected over millennia of dealing with their children's problems. I just think you should consider all your options, honey. Fighting in court is going to be expensive and stressful, and rolling over is going to leave me homeless. So I guess I'll take expensive and stressful. We ended the call shortly after that, with Mom saying she'd pray about it, which is Mom speak for, I think you're wrong, but I love you anyway. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I'd just gone 3 rounds in a boxing ring with someone who was supposed to be in my corner. But Mom was just the opening act. Over the next few days, I got calls from my Aunt Linda, who wanted to know what really happened, because she'd heard conflicting stories. I got a text from my cousin Mike saying I should just give her the house. Bro, It's not worth the stress. I got a Facebook message from my uncle on my dad's side, a man I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, telling me that in his day, men handled these things differently, which I'm pretty sure was code for, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I wanted to chime in anyway. It was like being slowly pecked to death by concerned ducks. Every single one of them had an opinion. Every single one of them thought they knew better than me about my own situation. And every single one of them seemed to think that the solution was for me to just give up and let Tessa have what she wanted, because that would be easier, or better for everyone, or the mature thing to do. The only person who actually got it, the only person who didn't immediately jump to suggesting I surrender, was my buddy Ravi. I'd known Ravi since college, back when we were both broke students living on ramen and dreams. He'd been my best man at my wedding to Tessa, and he'd also been the guy who'd helped me move out when the divorce was finalized. Ravi had seen Tessa in full form. He'd witnessed her in action during some of our worst fights. He knew exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. I met him for drinks at O'Malley's, this dive bar near downtown that smelled like beer and broken dreams, but had the best wings in the city. We grabbed a booth in the back, ordered a pitcher, and I gave him the full rundown of everything that had happened since the coffee shop disaster. Ravi listened to the whole story, occasionally shaking his head or muttering, "No way," under his breath. When I finished, he took a long drink of his beer, set it down, and looked at me with the kind of expression you'd give someone who just told you their house was haunted by a ghost that only steals left socks. "Bro," he said slowly, "she's the type to ask for your Netflix password in the divorce decree." I laughed for the first time in days. A real laugh, not the bitter, crazy person laugh I'd been doing in my kitchen. "You're not wrong. She probably would have if her lawyer had thought of it. I'm being serious, man. Tessa's always been about the angle. She's always working an angle. Remember when you guys were getting married and she wanted you to put her name on your life insurance, but she didn't want to add you to hers? Remember that?" I did remember. I'd forgotten about it until Ravi brought it up, but yeah, that had been a thing. A weird thing that should have been a red flag, but that I'd ignored because I was in love and stupid. "She's doing the same thing now," Ravi continued. "She's working the angle. She sees your house. She sees that Blake needs a place. And she's thinking, why should we buy when we can just take Liam's? It's not about fairness or Ellie or any of that crap she's feeding your mom. It's about convenience. She's always been about what's convenient for her. Tell that to my family," I said, gesturing with my beer. "Everyone keeps saying I should compromise. Like compromising my own house is somehow reasonable. Your family's soft, man. No offense. They don't get it. They think if everyone just plays nice, everything works out. But Tessa's not playing nice. She's playing to win. And if you don't fight back, she's gonna steamroll you." We spent the next hour talking strategy. Well, mostly Ravi talking and me listening while I worked my way through too many wings and too much beer. He suggested I document everything, get a good lawyer, and make her regret even thinking about this. By the time I left, I felt better. Not good, but better. Like maybe I wasn't completely crazy for fighting this. Then there were the ex-in-laws. Oh boy, the ex-in-laws. Tessa's parents had never particularly liked me. I think they always thought their daughter could do better than an architect who wore jeans to family dinners. But we'd maintained a civil relationship after the divorce because of Ellie. They were her grandparents, after all, and I wasn't going to be the kind of petty ex who cut them off completely. But when Tessa's mom, Carol, called me 3 days after my conversation with Ravi, I realized that civility had officially ended. "Liam," she said, and her voice had that tight, controlled quality that meant she was angry but trying to sound reasonable. "I wanted to talk to you about this house situation." "Of course you did." I was in my car, sitting in the parking lot of Ellie's school, waiting for pickup. "Let me guess. Tessa called you." "She's my daughter." "Of course she called me. And she's very upset about how you're handling this." "How I'm handling this?" "Carol, she's suing me. For my house. How exactly should I be handling it? Should I just hand over the keys and say thanks for the memories?" "Blake's a good man," Carol said, completely ignoring my question. "He's good for Tessa. He's stable, he's got ambition, and he treats her well. They're trying to build a future together, and you're standing in the way." I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying what I was really thinking, which involved several words that would have gotten my mouth washed out with soap if I'd said them in front of my mother. "Blake's a gym influencer who posts videos of himself doing squats for internet points. That's not stability, Carol. That's narcissism with abs. That's not fair. You don't even know him. I know he's trying to steal my house without paying for it. That's really all I need to know. Carol made this huffing sound that reminded me exactly where Tessa got her dramatic sighs. You're being selfish, Liam. This isn't just about you. Think about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone is for Tessa and Blake to buy their own house like adults. You know, the way normal people do it. We went back and forth for a few more minutes before she gave up and hung up on me, which was fine because I had to go pick up Ellie anyway. But as I walked toward the school entrance, I couldn't shake this feeling that everyone in Tessa's orbit was being fed the same story. The same carefully crafted narrative about how I was the bad guy, and she was just trying to do what was best for her family. Meanwhile, Ellie, the actual kid in this situation, the one person whose welfare everyone claimed to care about, was starting to sense that something was wrong. Kids are like that. They pick up on tension the way dogs can smell fear. You can tell them everything's fine, you can smile and joke and act normal, but they know. They always know. I noticed it in little ways at first. She was quieter than usual. She'd stopped asking about visiting her mom as much. And then one afternoon, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, drawing with her markers. Nothing unusual about that. Ellie loved to draw, but when I looked at what she was making, my heart sank. She'd drawn a picture of a house. Our house, I assumed, based on the blue door she'd colored in. There were 3 stick figures in front of it. One tall figure labeled Daddy, one small figure labeled me, and one figure that was just a giant red X. No label, just an X. That's a nice drawing, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Who's that? Ellie looked up at me with those big, serious eyes. That's Mummy, she said matter-of-factly. She doesn't live here anymore. Kids don't need lawyers to see the truth. They just see it. Simple, clear, without all the complicated adult nonsense getting in the way. And looking at that drawing, at that red X where her mother should have been, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to fight for this house. Not just for me, but for her. Because this was her home too, and she deserved to keep it. You ever get that creeping sensation that something's off in your own house? Not like horror movie off, where you hear footsteps in the attic and discover a ghost with unfinished business. More like subtle, everyday things that make you question whether you're losing your mind or whether someone's been messing with your stuff. That's where I found myself about a week after the ex-in-laws started their campaign to convince me I was the villain in this story. Little things. Weird things. Things that made me feel like I was starring in a really low-budget psychological thriller where the twist ending is that I'm just paranoid and need therapy. It started with the smoke alarm. I woke up one Tuesday morning to the most annoying sound known to mankind. That chirping beep that smoke alarms make when the battery's dying. You know the one. The beep that happens exactly every 60 seconds, like clockwork, designed by sadists who understand that the human brain can't ignore repetitive noises even when we're trying to sleep. It's 3 a.m. and your smoke alarm decides it's the perfect time to announce it needs a new battery, because of course it does. Smoke alarms don't die during convenient daylight hours. They wait until you're deep in REM sleep, and then they attack. I stumbled out of bed, grabbed a chair from the kitchen, and climbed up to deal with it. Except when I opened the smoke alarm, there was no battery. Not a dead battery. Not a dying battery. No battery at all. Just an empty compartment staring back at me like it was judging my life choices. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know I changed that battery maybe 4 months ago. I specifically remember doing it because Ellie had been watching me and asking approximately 8,000 questions about how batteries work and why smoke alarms need them and whether robots have smoke alarms. That's not the kind of thing you forget. But standing there at 3 a.m. on a kitchen chair in my boxers, looking at an empty battery compartment, I started second-guessing everything I knew about reality. Maybe I dreamed changing the battery? Maybe I was having some kind of early-onset memory loss. Maybe I'd been abducted by aliens who specifically targeted smoke alarm batteries because they were researching human safety protocols. I found a new battery, installed it, went back to bed, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just one of those weird things that happens. Maybe the battery had fallen out somehow. Maybe Ellie had taken it for a school project and forgot to mention it. Maybe I was overthinking things because I was stressed about the lawsuit and my brain was looking for problems where there weren't any. Then the heating situation happened. It was mid-October, and California weather is schizophrenic at the best of times. During the day, it'd be 75 degrees and sunny. Perfect weather for pretending your life isn't falling apart. But at night, the temperature would drop into the 50s, cold enough that you needed to run the heater unless you wanted to wake up feeling like you'd spent the night in a refrigerator. I'd program the thermostat to kick on automatically at 9 p.m., stay on overnight, and shut off at 6 a.m. Simple, straightforward. The kind of basic home automation that makes you feel like you're living in the future even though you're really just using technology from 2010. Except the heating kept shutting off randomly in the middle of the night. I'd wake up freezing, check my phone, see that it was 2 a.m., and realize the house felt like a meat locker. I'd stumble to the thermostat, and sure enough, it would be off. Not set to a lower temperature. Off. Completely off. Like someone had manually turned it off. The first time it happened, I figured I must have accidentally bumped it or programmed it wrong. The second time, I thought maybe the thermostat was malfunctioning. By the third time, I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. I checked the programming. I reset the whole system. I even called the manufacturer's customer service line and spent 45 minutes on hold listening to Muzak versions of popular songs, while a tech support person in a call center somewhere walked me through diagnostics. Everything checked out. The thermostat was fine. The programming was correct. There was no reason it should be shutting off. Sometimes houses just do weird things, the tech support guy said, which is exactly what you want to hear from someone whose job is to understand how houses work. Could be a wiring issue. Could be interference from other electronics. Could be a lot of things. Could be someone breaking into my house and manually turning it off. I thought, but didn't say, because that would make me sound insane. Then came the garage door incident. I got home from work one Thursday afternoon. Had to leave early to pick up Ellie from school because Tessa had suddenly decided she couldn't make it for her pickup day, which was becoming a pattern. And as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The garage door was half open. Not fully open like I'd left it that way on purpose. Not closed like it should have been. Half open, like someone had opened it, gone inside, and then closed it most of the way but not all the way. I sat in my car for a solid minute, staring at that garage door, running through possibilities in my head. Had I left it like that this morning? No. I specifically remembered closing it. I always closed it. I had an automatic opener that I religiously used every single time because I was paranoid about people breaking in and stealing my tools. Had the mechanism broken? Maybe. Garage doors are finicky. They break. It happens. But combined with the smoke alarm battery and the heating situation, this was starting to feel less like a series of coincidences and more like a pattern. I got out of the car, walked up to the garage, and manually closed it the rest of the way. Nothing seemed out of place inside. My tools were still there. Nothing was obviously missing or disturbed. But there was this feeling, this intangible, probably just paranoia feeling, that someone had been in there. That someone had gone through my stuff. I was still standing in the garage, trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous, when Ellie came bouncing up behind me. "Daddy," she said cheerfully, completely oblivious to my internal crisis. "Can we have mac and cheese for dinner?" "Sure, sweetie," I said, closing the garage door behind us as we walked into the house through the connecting door. "Hey, did Mummy mention anything about stopping by today?" Ellie looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Oh yeah, Mummy and Blake came while you were at work. They said it was a surprise." I stopped walking. Actually stopped mid-step like someone had pressed pause on my entire existence. "They what?" "They came over," Ellie repeated, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "They brought me a cookie and said they wanted to check on the house. Blake said he was looking at the..." She scrunched up her face, trying to remember. "The smoke thingy on the ceiling. The smoke alarm." Blake had been checking the smoke alarm. The same smoke alarm that mysteriously had no battery 3 days ago. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly. More like the realization that I wasn't paranoid. That all these weird things weren't coincidences, or my imagination, or faulty wiring. Someone, specifically my ex-wife and her muscle-bound boyfriend, had been coming into my house without my permission, messing with my stuff. Did they say anything else? I asked Ellie, trying to keep my voice calm and normal even though my brain was screaming. She shrugged. "Blake went into the garage for a minute. He said he wanted to see if you had any WD-40? Is that a thing?" WD-40. Right. Because Blake definitely needed WD-40 for something urgent and couldn't possibly get it at any of the 17 hardware stores within a 5-mile radius. He absolutely had to break into my garage to find it. That night, after Ellie went to bed, I sat in my living room and had a serious conversation with myself about whether I was overreacting. Maybe they had legitimate reasons for being there. Maybe Tessa had forgotten to tell me she was stopping by. Maybe Blake really did need WD-40 for some emergency that required him to trespass in my garage. But the more I thought about it, the less legitimate it seemed. The smoke alarm battery, the heating being shut off, the garage door being left open. These weren't coincidences. This was deliberate. This was someone trying to create problems, trying to make my house seem unsafe or poorly maintained, trying to build a case that I wasn't capable of taking care of the property. I pulled out my laptop and started researching home security cameras. Not because I'm paranoid. Okay, maybe a little paranoid, but because I needed proof. If Tessa and Blake were going to play games, I needed evidence. I needed to catch them in the act. I ordered a set of small security cameras on Amazon with next-day delivery, because Jeff Bezos might be a supervillain, but he's a supervillain who understands urgency. The cameras were wireless, motion-activated, and could record to the cloud. Perfect for catching people who thought they could just waltz into my house whenever they felt like it. The cameras arrived the next day. I installed one in the living room, one in the hallway near the garage door, and one in the kitchen where the thermostat was. I didn't tell anyone about them. Didn't mention them to Ellie. Definitely didn't tell Tessa. I just set them up, activated them, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, I was at work trying to focus on a client presentation about sustainable building materials when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. Motion detected in living room. I opened the app, pulled up the live feed, and there he was. Blake. In my house. Wearing a tank top that showed off his arms because apparently he was physically incapable of wearing actual sleeves, wandering around my living room like he owned the place. I watched as he walked into the hallway, looked around like he was casing the joint, and then headed toward the garage door. The camera there picked him up too. He was holding something. A screwdriver, it looked like. And he went to the electrical panel on the wall. I kid you not, this man, this grown adult who was suing me for my property, was standing in my garage, holding a screwdriver backwards, trying to look like he knew what he was doing with electrical wiring. He wasn't even holding the right end. The handle was pointing at the panel. He might as well have been trying to perform surgery with the wrong end of a scalpel. I saved the video, took screenshots, and forwarded everything to my lawyer with a message that just said, "This is the man claiming he needs my house." My lawyer responded within minutes. "This is gold. Do not confront them. Let them keep digging." So I didn't confront them. I just watched, and waited, and collected evidence. Because apparently, my ex-wife and her boyfriend were doing a better job of sabotaging their own case than I ever could have. There's something uniquely depressing about courtrooms that I don't think anyone talks about enough. It's not just the legal drama or the life-changing decisions being made. It's the aesthetic. Every courtroom I've ever been in looks like it was designed by someone who got their degree in soul-crushing beige from the University of Disappointment. The walls are always this weird off-white color that's trying to be neutral, but really just screams, "Abandon all hope. Ye who enter here." The fluorescent lights flicker just enough to make you wonder if you're about to have a seizure, or if that's just the ambience they're going for. The chairs are uncomfortable in a way that feels intentional, like they want you physically suffering while you're emotionally suffering, just to really drive the point home. And the smell. Why does every courthouse smell like old paper, stale coffee, and the accumulated regrets of everyone who's ever had to settle a dispute through legal means? It's like they bottle desperation and spray it through the ventilation system. I arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes early because I'm the kind of neurotic person who'd rather sit in uncomfortable chairs marinating in anxiety than risk being late. My lawyer, Richard Chun, met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. Richard was everything you'd expect from a good divorce and property attorney. Sharp suit, sharper mind, and the kind of perpetually tired expression that said he'd seen every flavor of human stupidity and was no longer surprised by any of it. "Ready?" he asked, adjusting his tie in a way that seemed more like a nervous habit than actual necessity. "As ready as I'll ever be to defend my right to keep my own house," I replied. "Is that something people normally have to do? Or is this a special level of absurd reserved just for me?" Richard gave me a thin smile. "Oh, I've seen worse. Last month I had a case where a guy tried to claim his ex-wife's kidney because he'd paid for the transplant surgery. Humans are endlessly creative when it comes to property disputes. That's somehow both horrifying and weirdly comforting, I said. At least I'm not kidney guy. We walked into the courtroom, and there they were. Tessa and Blake, sitting at the plaintiff's table with Tessa's lawyer, a man named Douglas Pemberton, who looked exactly like you'd picture a lawyer who takes sketchy cases for money. Expensive suit, slicked back hair, and a smile that probably cost more in dental work than my car. He was the kind of guy who'd defend a corporation dumping toxic waste into a children's hospital and sleep like a baby afterward. Tessa was dressed in what I'd started calling her sympathy outfit, a modest navy dress with a cardigan, minimal makeup, hair in a simple ponytail. She looked like she was interviewing for a job as a kindergarten teacher, not suing her ex-husband for his house. It was calculated. Everything with Tessa was calculated. She'd probably practiced her "I'm just a concerned mother trying to do what's best" face in the mirror for an hour before coming here. Blake, on the other hand, looked like he'd gotten lost on his way to a fitness expo. He was wearing a suit. I'll give him that. But it was too tight in the shoulders, probably because his arms were too swole for normal human clothing. His tie was slightly crooked, and he kept fidgeting with it like it was choking him. He looked about as comfortable and formal, whereas a golden retriever at a cat show. When we made eye contact, Blake gave me this weird head nod that I think was supposed to be respectful, but came across as condescending. Like, "Hey bro, no hard feelings about trying to steal your house. We're all men here." I didn't nod back. I just stared at him until he looked away, because I'm petty and I'd earned that moment. The judge walked in, Judge Patricia Morrison, according to the nameplate on her bench, and everyone stood. She was probably in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She had the expression of someone who'd been dealing with idiots all day and was already done with everyone's nonsense before we'd even started. I liked her immediately. "Please be seated," she said, settling into her chair with the weariness of someone who knows exactly how their day is going to go and isn't excited about it. Case number 2025, CV 04821, Williams versus Parker, property dispute. Counsel, are both parties present? Douglas Pemberton stood up, buttoning his jacket in this performative way that made it clear he thought he was in a legal drama on TV. "Yes, Your Honor." Douglas Pemberton representing the plaintiff, Ms. Tessa Williams. Richard stood too, much less dramatically. Richard Chun for the defendant, Mr. Liam Parker. "Excellent. Mr. Pemberton, this is your motion. Please proceed." And oh boy, did he proceed. Douglas Pemberton launched into his opening statement like he was auditioning for a role in a legal thriller. He paced back and forth in front of the judge, which seems unnecessary when you're in a small courtroom and everyone can hear you just fine, and spoke in this booming voice that was way too loud for the space. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing expansively like he was addressing a packed auditorium instead of one judge in a room that smelled like old paper. "This case is about fairness. It's about justice. It's about a woman who sacrificed years of her life supporting her husband's career, only to be cast aside when he no longer needed her. Ms. Williams isn't asking for charity. She's not asking for a handout. She's asking for what's rightfully hers." I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Sacrificed years supporting my career? She'd spent most of our marriage complaining about how much I worked while spending the money I earned on yoga retreats and brunch with her friends. But sure, she was the real hero of this story. Pemberton continued, building momentum like a televangelist working toward the collection plate part of the sermon. "This is about female empowerment, Your Honor. About giving women the opportunity to start new chapters in their lives without being held back by vindictive ex-spouses who want to control them through property ownership. Female empowerment." He actually said that, with a straight face. He was trying to frame stealing my house as some kind of feminist statement, like Tessa was Rosa Parks and I was the bus driver. I looked over at Richard, who was taking notes, but whose expression clearly said, "Is this guy for real?" "Ms. Williams has moved on with her life," Pemberton said, gesturing toward Blake, who straightened up in his chair like he'd just been called on in class. "She's found happiness with a good man who wants to provide her with stability and security. All she's asking is for the opportunity to establish a proper home for her future family. The property in question, which I paid for," I muttered under my breath. Richard elbowed me. represents a fair and equitable resolution to the dissolution of a marriage where assets were not properly distributed. My client isn't trying to punish Mr. Parker. She's simply trying to move forward with her life. He went on like this for what felt like 17 hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Every sentence was crafted to make Tessa sound like a victim and me sound like some kind of property-hoarding villain who was standing in the way of true love and happiness. It was masterful, really, in a completely dishonest way. If I didn't know the actual facts of the situation, I might have been convinced. Finally, Pemberton wrapped up his performance with a flourish. Your Honor, we ask that you grant M.S. Williams the opportunity to purchase the property from Mr. Parker at a fair market value, allowing both parties to move forward with their lives in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. Purchase. He said purchase, like they were offering to pay me. That was new. That wasn't in the original lawsuit. They were already changing their story, probably because even their lawyer realized that just give us your house wasn't going to fly. Judge Morrison looked unimpressed. Mr. Chun, your response? Richard stood up, and I appreciated that he didn't do the whole performative jacket button thing. He just stood there, calm and professional, like a normal human having a normal conversation. Your Honor, I'll keep this brief because the facts speak for themselves. Mr. Parker purchased the property in question 5 years ago, after the marriage, but solely in his name. He provided the down payment from his personal savings. He has made every mortgage payment. Ms. Williams was never on the deed, never contributed financially to the property, and formally waived any claim to it in the divorce settlement 2 years ago. This lawsuit is an attempt to relitigate a settled matter, and there's no legal basis for it. Short, sweet, accurate. I loved Richard. Judge Morrison turned her attention to me. Mr. Parker, do you have anything to add? I stood up, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Public speaking has never been my thing. I'm much better at putting my thoughts into buildings than words, but I'd prepared for this. Sort of. I'd practiced in my car on the drive over, at least. Your Honor, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I designed that house. I drew up the plans. I pored over every detail for months before it was even built. I paid for every nail, every board, every fixture. When Ms. Williams, decided to leave, I stayed. I kept making the payments. I kept the house maintained. I built a home there for my daughter. The only thing my ex-wife built in that house was debt, and she already took half of everything else in the divorce. I could feel Tessa glaring at me from across the room. Could see Blake leaning over to whisper something in her ear. Probably something about positive vibes, or letting go of negativity, or whatever Instagram wisdom he'd absorbed that morning. Judge Morrison looked between us, her expression unreadable. Mr. Pemberton, you're asking me to essentially overturn a settled divorce decree and force Mr. Parker to sell his property. That's a significant request. What's your legal justification? Pemberton launched into some explanation about equitable distribution and changed circumstances and a bunch of other legal jargon that sounded impressive but was essentially empty calories. Lots of words, no substance. The judge held up her hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. Do you have any documentation showing that Ms. Williams contributed to the property financially or that she has any legal claim to it beyond what was already settled in the divorce? Well, Your Honor, the contributions weren't necessarily financial. That's a no, then. Judge Morrison turned to me. Mr. Parker, do you have proof of your claims? Bank statements, mortgage documents, the divorce decree. This was it. This was my moment. I reached down, picked up the folder I'd been carrying, and walked forward to place it on the judge's bench. It landed with a satisfying thunk that echoed through the quiet courtroom. Inside were 200 pages of receipts, statements, documents, and proof. Every payment, every invoice, every piece of evidence that screamed, "This house is mine." Your Honor, I said, I brought receipts. Literal ones. For the first time since we'd entered the courtroom, Judge Morrison smiled. Just slightly, barely a twitch at the corner of her mouth, but it was there. She opened the folder and started flipping through pages, and I walked back to my seat feeling like maybe, just maybe, this was going to be okay. You know that feeling after a major life event, when your phone transforms from a useful communication device into a weapon of psychological warfare? That's exactly what happened the second I walked out of that courthouse. I'm talking about the kind of notification overload that makes you want to throw your phone into the nearest body of water and live off the grid like a hermit who communicates exclusively through smoke signals and angry hand gestures. My phone started buzzing in my pocket before we'd even made it to the parking lot, and by the time I got Ellie and my mom into the car, the thing was practically vibrating itself off the dashboard like it was possessed by the ghost of every awkward conversation I'd ever avoided. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and it had been maybe 10 minutes since the judge dismissed the case. I hadn't even processed what just happened in that courtroom. The fact that my 7-year-old daughter had just saved my house with more courage and common sense than most adults display in their entire lives. And already the vultures were circling, ready to pick apart the carcass of Tessa's failed lawsuit. I dropped my mom and Ellie off at home first because I didn't want Ellie to hear whatever insanity was about to come through my phone. Mom gave me one of her patented, "Are you okay?" looks that mothers have perfected over millennia of worrying about their children, and I gave her the standard, "I'm fine" response that we both knew was a lie, but accepted anyway, because sometimes lying is easier than explaining that you feel like you've just gone 12 rounds in a boxing ring with your own life. "Call me if you need anything," Mom said, already shepherding Ellie toward the house. "And Liam, I'm proud of you. You stood up for yourself." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without my voice cracking like a teenage boy going through puberty, and waited until they were inside before I finally looked at my phone. The screen looked like a war zone. Missed calls from Tessa, 5 of them. 3 from her lawyer, Douglas Pemberton, which was interesting because you'd think after getting absolutely destroyed in court, the last thing he'd want to do is call the guy who just won. 2 calls from Tessa's mother, Carol, which was about as appealing as a root canal performed by a dentist who's had too much coffee and not enough sleep. And 1 call from an unknown number that had left a voicemail. But it was the text messages that really got me. They read like a greatest hits compilation of people who suddenly realized they'd backed the wrong horse and were now trying to save face. From Tessa, "We need to talk. Please call me." 5 minutes later, "Liam, I know you're angry, but we need to discuss this like adults." 10 minutes after that, "You didn't have to embarrass me in front of everyone. That was cruel." Oh, I was cruel. Right. I was the cruel one. Not the person who sued me for my house, trespassed on my property, and tried to sabotage my smoke detectors. No, I was cruel for having the audacity to defend myself with evidence. That logic was so backwards it could have won a gold medal in mental gymnastics. From Blake, and yes, I still had his number saved in my phone from back when Tessa and I were trying to co-parent peacefully, and he'd somehow ended up in a group chat. Came this absolute gem. "You didn't have to make it public, man. Could have handled this privately. Not cool." I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds, trying to figure out if Blake had suffered some kind of head injury that affected his understanding of cause and effect. He'd broken into my house, filmed himself tampering with safety equipment, and somehow I was the bad guy for letting a judge see the evidence? That was like robbing a bank, getting caught on security cameras, and then complaining that the police were being unfair by watching the footage. I typed out about 6 different responses, each one progressively more sarcastic than the last, before finally settling on, "You literally sued me in public court. Everything about this was public. Maybe next time don't commit crimes on camera." Send. Done. Moving on. The voicemail from the unknown number turned out to be from a local news station asking if I wanted to comment on the viral courthouse video, because apparently someone had recorded Ellie's testimony and it was making the rounds on social media. Great. Just what I needed. My daughter's brave moment being turned into content for people to share between cat videos and political arguments. I deleted the voicemail without responding because there was no universe in which I was going to let my kid become a meme. I was still sitting in my car in the driveway, contemplating whether it was too early in the day to drink, when my phone rang again. Mom. Of course it was Mom. She had that maternal sixth sense that told her exactly when I was at my most vulnerable and needed someone to either comfort me or give me a reality check. "Hey, Mom," I answered, pinching the bridge of my nose. "How are you holding up?" she asked, and I could hear Ellie singing something in the background about unicorns, blissfully unaware of the chaos her testimony had caused. "I'm fine. Just dealing with the aftermath. Everyone and their dog is calling me." "I saw some of the messages you got," Mom said carefully. "Tessa's mother called me too." "Of course she did. Carol was probably on a campaign to spin this whole thing as a misunderstanding, to make it seem like Tessa was the victim of some kind of conspiracy instead of the architect of her own downfall. What did she say? I asked, even though I really didn't want to know. She wanted me to talk to you about maybe not making them enemies. About trying to keep things civil for Ellie's sake. Mom paused. I told her that Tessa made herself an enemy when she unscrewed your smoke alarm. I had to smile at that. My mom, the eternal peacekeeper, had actually taken my side. That was character growth. That was development. That was the kind of support I'd needed 2 years ago during the divorce, but was grateful to have now. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it. You're my son. Of course I'm going to support you, even when you're being stubborn. She said it with affection, the kind of gentle ribbing that only mothers can get away with. But Liam, seriously, are you okay? That was a lot in there today. Was I okay? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? I just won my case. I kept my house. My daughter had proven herself to be braver and more honest than half the adults in that courtroom. By all objective measures, I should be celebrating. But instead I just felt tired. Bone deep, existentially exhausted tired. The kind of tired that comes from having to fight for something that should have never been in question in the first place. I will be, I said finally. I just need to process everything. And probably change all my locks before Tessa decides to come by for round 2. That's probably smart. And Liam? Ellie wants to talk to you. There was some shuffling on the other end, and then I heard my daughter's voice. Daddy, hey sweetheart. You doing okay? Yeah. Grandma made me cookies. The chocolate chip ones. She said it with the kind of enthusiasm that only a 7-year-old can muster for baked goods. Daddy, are we safe now? Can we stay in our house? And there it was. The question that cut through all the legal nonsense and adult drama and got right to the heart of what this whole thing had been about. Not property rights or divorce settlements or who paid for what. Just a little girl wanting to know if her home was secure. Yeah, baby. We're safe. We get to stay in our house. Thanks to you. I was really scared, she admitted quietly. But I didn't want to move again. I like my room. And my treehouse that you're still going to finish building, right? I laughed, a real laugh that felt good after days of stress. Right. I promise I'll finish the treehouse. We can work on it this weekend. Okay. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Ellie. More than anything. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few more minutes, watching the sun start to set over my neighborhood, in front of my house, that I got to keep. Then I drove to Home Depot because if I was going to secure my property, I was going to do it right. I bought new locks for every exterior door. The expensive kind with the fancy deadbolts that require actual keys instead of the cheap ones that you can pick with a credit card and determination. I bought a new garage door opener and destroyed the old remote that Tessa probably had a copy of somewhere. I bought security system upgrades and outdoor cameras that would cover every angle of my property. The cashier looked at my card and asked if I was opening a locksmith business, and I just smiled and said divorce, which made her laugh and give me a sympathetic nod. That night, after I picked Ellie up and made us dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup because I was too tired to be fancy, I spent 3 hours installing every lock, every bolt, every piece of security equipment. Ellie helped, handing me tools and asking questions about how locks work and whether bad guys could still get in if they really wanted to. Nobody's getting in without permission anymore, I told her, testing the new front door deadbolt. It clicked into place with a solid, satisfying sound that felt like closure. This house is locked down tighter than Fort Knox. What's Fort Knox? It's where they keep all the gold. It's super secure. Nothing gets in or out without authorization. She thought about this for a moment, then nodded seriously. Good. Because this is our gold. Our house is our gold. Kids, man, they just get it sometimes. Cut through all the complicated adult explanations and hit you with wisdom that's so simple and true it hurts. That night, after Ellie went to bed, I sat on my porch with a beer in my phone, which had finally stopped buzzing constantly. I scrolled through the messages I hadn't responded to, the half-hearted apologies from Tessa that weren't really apologies, the defensive messages from Blake trying to justify his actions, the concerned texts from relatives who wanted to make sure I wasn't going to do anything rash. I didn't respond to any of them. What was there to say? I'd said everything I needed to say in that courtroom. I'd presented my evidence, defended my property, and won. The rest was just noise. Just people trying to rewrite the narrative to make themselves feel better about what happened. When the new locks clicked shut that night, it wasn't just the sound of metal sliding into place. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of boundaries being enforced. It was the sound of me finally taking back control of my own life. And if anyone asked, and they did, constantly, annoyingly, yes, the alarms worked perfectly. The house stood strong. And the only person with keys now actually knew how to use them. The thing about winning a lawsuit is that nobody prepares you for what comes after. They show you all these movies and TV shows where the hero wins their case. Triumphant music plays, and then it cuts to them living their best life like everything magically fixed itself the moment the judge banged their gavel. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life is messy and anticlimactic and full of awkward silences where you're supposed to just move on. Like flipping a switch from actively being sued to normal functioning human is something you can just do without any transition period or emotional processing time. The weeks following the courthouse showdown were weird, suspiciously quiet, like that moment in horror movies right before the jump scare. Except the jump scare never came, and you're just left sitting there in silence wondering if you're supposed to relax or stay on high alert forever. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Tessa to appeal the decision or Blake to show up at my door with some new scheme, but nothing happened. It was peaceful in a way that made me more nervous than the actual chaos had. Tessa did text me, of course, because apparently losing in court doesn't mean you've learned your lesson about boundaries. Her messages read like they'd been workshopped by a PR team trying to manage a celebrity scandal. I want to apologize for any misunderstanding that may have occurred during this difficult time. May have occurred. Like breaking into my house and unscrewing smoke detectors was some kind of ambiguous gray area that reasonable people could disagree about. I hope we can move forward in a spirit of cooperation for Ellie's sake. There it was again. Ellie's sake, the universal trump card that people play when they want you to forget they tried to screw you over. I didn't respond to most of them. What was I supposed to say? Thanks for the non-apology apology. Really appreciate you taking responsibility for absolutely nothing. Sometimes silence is the best response, especially when the other person is just fishing for absolution they haven't earned. Blake, meanwhile, had taken to social media to process his feelings in the way that influencers do, publicly and with absolutely no self-awareness. His Instagram became this bizarre gallery of gym selfies with captions that were clearly about our situation but vague enough that his followers probably thought he was just being deep. Moving on from negativity flexed biceps, he posted over a picture of himself doing bicep curls. Winners focus on winning. Losers focus on winners' fire, accompanied by him deadlifting weights that honestly looked photoshopped because no human spine should bend that way. New chapter, new energy, no room for toxic people victory and. With him drinking a protein shake and staring pensively into the distance like he was in a cologne commercial. I unfollowed him faster than you could say restraining order. Life's too short to watch someone perform their emotional breakdowns through workout content. But here's what I realized during those quiet weeks. I'd spent so much time fighting Tessa's nonsense that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just live. To exist without constantly looking over my shoulder or preparing for the next crisis. And instead of spending my energy fixing her messes or managing her drama, I could actually focus on fixing my own life. Novel concept, right? Using my time and energy on things that made me happy instead of constantly playing defense against someone else's chaos. So I made a decision. Ellie and I were going to finish that treehouse. You remember the treehouse, the frame I'd built in the backyard 2 years ago that had been sitting there unfinished like a monument to good intentions and poor time management. Every time I looked at it, I felt guilty. Another promise half kept, another project abandoned because life got complicated. But not anymore. We had time now. We had peace. We had hardware store receipts and determination. That first Saturday, Ellie and I headed to Home Depot. Again, because apparently I was single-handedly keeping that place in business, and loaded up on lumber, paint, and supplies. Ellie insisted on picking out the paint colors herself, which is how we ended up with purple walls, a yellow floor, and green trim that made the whole thing look like it had been designed by a very enthusiastic abstract artist. I didn't argue. It was her treehouse. She could paint it to look like a rainbow threw up on it, if that made her happy. We spent 3 weekends working on it. For months. That's how long it took for Tessa to show her face at a family event after the courthouse disaster. For months of blessed silence, of life returning to something resembling normal, of Ellie and me existing in our house, without the constant threat of legal papers or midnight trespassing. For months of me almost forgetting that my ex-wife had tried to steal my property with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Almost. The family gathering was at my cousin Sarah's house. One of those big Thanksgiving-adjacent dinners that my family insisted on having in October because apparently one massive family gathering per year wasn't enough torture. I debated not going, but Ellie wanted to see her cousins, and I wasn't going to let my drama deprive her of normal family experiences. So we showed up with a store-bought pie because I'd learned years ago that nobody actually wants my cooking. Bearing gifts from the bakery section was acceptable, and pretending you made it yourself was a skill I'd perfected. I was in the kitchen, helping Sarah's husband with something involving cranberries that neither of us understood, when I heard Ellie's voice from the living room. Not scared exactly, but surprised. That tone kids get when they see someone they weren't expecting, like when you run into your teacher at the grocery store, and your brain can't process them existing outside of school. I walked into the living room, and there she was. Tessa, standing in the entryway like she'd been invited, which she probably had been because my family has this annoying habit of trying to maintain relationships with everyone regardless of whether they've committed crimes against property and common sense. She was wearing casual clothes, jeans and a sweater. The kind of outfit that said, "I'm just here for family time. Nothing to see here. Let's all pretend I didn't sue the host's cousin 4 months ago." Blake wasn't with her, I noticed. Small mercies. Our eyes met across the room, and I watched her face do this complicated journey through several emotions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally settling on fake pleasantness. She walked over, navigating around relatives and small children like she was crossing a minefield, until she was standing in front of me holding a bottle of wine that she'd probably grabbed from the convenience store on the way over. "Liam," she said, her voice doing that thing where she tried to sound casual but came off as rehearsed. "I didn't know you'd be here." "It's my cousin's house," I replied flatly. "Where else would I be?" She did this little laugh that wasn't really a laugh, more of an acknowledgement that I'd made a sound with my mouth. "Right. Of course." She shifted the wine bottle from one hand to the other, a nervous gesture that I recognized from years of marriage. "Look, I wanted to say, about everything that happened, no hard feelings." I stared at her for a long moment, watching her squirm under my gaze. No hard feelings. She'd sued me for my house, broken into my property, sabotaged safety equipment, and tried to manipulate a judge, and she wanted to know if there were no hard feelings. Like we'd had a minor disagreement about where to eat dinner. Not a full-blown legal battle that had cost me thousands in lawyer fees and years off my life from stress. "Oh, plenty," I said calmly, and I watched her face fall. "Plenty of hard feelings, Tessa. Just not yours anymore." She blinked at me, processing that. "That's not fair. I was just trying to steal my house." "Yeah, I know. You explained that very thoroughly in court. Multiple times." I crossed my arms. "But hey, points for creativity. Most people just accept the divorce settlement and move on. You decided to go for the gold." Her face flushed red, that angry color she got when someone called her out on her nonsense, and she couldn't deflect or play victim. "I came here to try to move past this. For Ellie's sake." There's that phrase again. Ellie's sake. You know what would have actually been for Ellie's sake? Not trying to make her homeless. Not breaking into her home. Not teaching her that it's okay to take things that don't belong to you if you really want them badly enough. Tessa's mouth opened and closed, searching for words. Finally, she just mumbled something about forgiveness and second chances and how families should support each other through difficult times. It was word salad, the kind of meaningless phrases people use when they know they're wrong but don't want to admit it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd been carrying around for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. A key. One of the old house keys from before I'd changed all the locks. I'd kept it specifically for this purpose, and I'd even taken the time to saw it neatly in half with a hacksaw in my garage. Very therapeutic, actually. Highly recommend. I held out the 2 pieces to Tessa. "You wanted a key to the house so badly. Here you go." She looked at the sawed-in-half key in my palm, then up at my face, then back at the key. That's not even funny." "Wasn't trying to be funny. You wanted access to my property. There's your access. Good luck using it." From behind me, I heard Ellie giggle. She'd been watching the whole exchange, probably understanding more than she should. Daddy, was that mean? I turned to her and smiled. A real smile, not the hostage smile or the courtroom smile. No, honey, that's called symbolic architecture. Ellie nodded seriously like that made perfect sense, then grabbed my hand. Can we go home now? I don't like it here anymore. Smart kid. We left shortly after that, making our excuses to Sarah and grabbing our coats. The drive home was quiet, comfortable. Ellie hummed along to the radio, some pop song about friendship and dancing that played on repeat every 20 minutes. That night, we had pancakes for dinner because rules are made to be broken and breakfast food is superior to dinner food anyway. We ate on the couch, watching cartoons, getting syrup on the cushions and not caring because it was our couch in our house and we could get syrup wherever we damn well pleased. When bedtime came and I tucked Ellie in, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes. I'm glad we got to keep our house, Daddy. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. After she fell asleep, I did my nightly rounds, checking windows, testing the new locks, making sure the security system was armed. When the front door lock clicked shut for the night, I stood there for a moment, listening to that sound. It wasn't the sound of revenge or anger or bitterness. It was the sound of peace, the sound of boundaries, the sound of a door that stayed closed unless I chose to open it. Closure isn't about slamming doors in people's faces or grand dramatic gestures. It's quieter than that. It's the simple click that says, you don't live here anymore. This is my space, my home, my life. And if anyone asks, and they still do sometimes, relatives who want to gossip or Blake's followers who somehow find my Instagram. Yes, the alarms work perfectly. The house stands strong. And the only person with a key now actually knows how to use it.